I was invisible. That's exactly how they planned to kill her. The night Victoria Hale walked into Blackwood Global's underground parking garage, 3 professional assassins were already in position. One behind a concrete column near the elevator bank, one crouched between 2 SUVs 50 feet away, and one waiting on the upper deck with a silenced rifle trained on the exact spot where she would stop to unlock her car. They had done their homework. They knew her route. They knew her timing. They knew that her 2-man security detail had been compromised 2 hours earlier. What they did not know, what nobody in that building knew, was that the janitor mopping the floor in the far corner of that garage had once led a 6-man SEAL team through 12 of the most dangerous hostage extractions in recent American military history, and he could see all 3 of them. Before we go any further, if you're watching this for the first time, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the stories we tell on this channel do not stop at 1 episode. New stories drop every week, and you do not want to be the person who finds out what happened 3 days late. While you're at it, tap the like button. It takes half a second, and it means the world to us. And drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. Seriously, we want to know. Every single comment gets read. We want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to that parking garage. The mop handle was the cheap kind, hollow aluminum, slightly bent at the collar, where someone had dropped it months ago and never bothered to replace it. Logan Mercer had put in 3 separate maintenance requests for a new one. All 3 had been ignored by building management, which was, he'd come to understand, simply how things worked at Blackwood Global Tower. You submitted the form. The form went nowhere. You kept doing the job with whatever you had. He didn't mind it the way he once would have. Minding things took energy, and Logan had learned, the hard way, over years that he didn't particularly enjoy remembering, to spend his energy only on what actually mattered. Right now, what mattered was the man near column 7. The guy had been standing there for 11 minutes, not smoking, not on his phone. Just standing, weight distributed slightly forward on his left foot, right hand hanging loose near his hip in a way that wasn't casual at all. It was controlled, practiced. Logan had seen that exact posture in places that no parking garage in downtown Chicago should ever remind him of. He didn't stop mopping. He kept his rhythm. Head down, shoulders relaxed, bucket squeaking along the painted floor as he worked his way toward the elevator bank in slow, unhurried loops. Just the janitor. Just the guy nobody looked at. He clocked the second one between the black SUVs parked in executive row, visible only as a shadow between wheel wells. But shadows didn't crouch like that unless they were attached to a person who was specifically trying not to be seen. The third one took him another 90 seconds to find. Upper deck, northeast stairwell access. He caught the reflection in the curved security mirror mounted at the ceiling corner, the slight geometric distortion of a rifle barrel resting against the railing. Logan's chest didn't tighten, his breathing didn't change. Something cold and very old settled into place behind his eyes, like a switch being thrown in a room he'd kept locked for a long time. He checked the elevator display above the doors. Lobby. Descending. He had maybe 45 seconds. The mop went into the bucket. He pushed both toward the nearest support column and kept walking, hands visible, pace unhurried. He'd left his phone in the supply closet 3 floors up because the battery had been dying all week, and he hadn't had time to charge it. He had no radio, no weapon. He had a key card, a folding box cutter he used to open supply shipments, and a reasonably accurate memory of the garage's structural layout from 6 months of working in this building. He positioned himself at column 3, solid poured concrete, wide enough, and waited. The elevator opened. Victoria Hale walked out alone. Logan had seen her dozens of times in this building without ever speaking a word to her. That was standard. She didn't notice janitors, which wasn't cruelty so much as simple executive tunnel vision. She moved through the building surrounded by her own thoughts, always on her way to or from something that mattered more than whatever was immediately in front of her. She wore her authority the way some women wore expensive perfume. You noticed it before you noticed anything else. Tonight she looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixed. Something deeper. She was 12 feet from her car when Logan moved. He came around the column at an angle that kept his body between her and the shooter's line of sight from the upper deck, crossed the distance in 4 long strides, caught her left arm, and turned her momentum with him rather than against her. Clean, controlled, no wasted motion. and pulled her into the shadow behind column 3, just as the silenced round punched through the air where her head had been and cracked against the far wall in a spray of concrete dust. She opened her mouth. His hand covered it before the sound came out. "Don't." He said it directly into her ear, barely above a breath. "There are 3 of them. One has a rifle on the upper deck. Don't make a sound." Her eyes were enormous. He could feel her whole body shaking against his arm. Not panicking, he realized, just flooded with adrenaline and processing it. That was different. That was actually useful. He held her there for 3 full seconds, watching the angle under the SUVs, watching for foot movement. The man at column 7 had already started moving toward the elevator bank. "Can you run?" Logan said. She gave a single tight nod against his hand. "Service corridor. 30 feet to your right, gray door with a push bar. When I move, you move with me. Stay low, stay inside my shadow. Don't stop." He looked at her directly. "You understand?" "Yes." Her voice was barely there, but it was steady. He marked that. "Now." They moved. The second gunman broke from between the SUVs, and Logan felt the trajectory of the man's body. He was angling to cut them off, not shoot, which meant they wanted her alive, which was useful information but also changed nothing about the immediate problem. Logan put himself between her and that angle and hit the push bar on the gray door hard enough that it bounced off the wall inside the corridor, and then they were through and running. The service corridor was narrow, lit by industrial fluorescence, smelling of cleaning chemicals and old concrete. Victoria's heels were loud as hell on the floor. "Shoes," Logan said without slowing. She kicked them off without asking why and kept running in her stockinged feet, which he noted with some small acknowledgement. He took her through 2 left turns and 1 right, up a half flight of stairs that maintenance used for equipment transport, and into a supply room he'd stocked himself 3 weeks ago because the shelving unit near the back wall had been broken and he'd reorganized everything. He knew exactly what was in here and exactly what wasn't. He pulled the door shut, killed the light, and listened. 60 seconds of nothing except both of them breathing. "Are they in the building?" she asked. "One might be. The other 2 have to cover exits. They won't know which way we went." He was already thinking past this room, calculating routes, weighing options. "We have a few minutes." "Who are they?" "I don't know yet." "What do you mean you don't know yet? You're a—" She stopped. He heard her reassembling the sentence. "You work in the building." "Yeah." A pause. That was not the reaction of someone who works in a building. He almost said something, decided against it. "We need to move again in about 4 minutes. There's a loading dock on the east side that has a dead angle from the street cameras. Can you walk without the shoes?" "I'm not—" "Yes. Yes, I can walk without the shoes." She exhaled. He heard her trying to slow herself down. "My security team. Do you know if they're—" "I don't know." He said it as gently as he could, which wasn't very. "I'm sorry." She went quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, not broken, just reorganized. "Okay. Loading dock. What happens after that?" "I have a car in the employee lot on Maple Street, 2 blocks east." "And then?" "Then we figure out the rest. That's not a plan. It's the start of one, Matt." Marcus Webb had worked security at Blackwood Global for 9 years, long enough that he'd stopped feeling like he was protecting anything and started feeling like furniture. He'd been on duty in the lobby that night when the call came through on his earpiece. 3 rapid clicks, the emergency signal. And by the time he reached the parking garage, the scene was already cold. Blood on the concrete near elevator bank B. A silenced round embedded in the far wall. 2 abandoned weapons near the service exit, and no sign of Victoria Hale. He stood in the middle of it all, breathing through his nose, and called his supervisor. "She's gone," he said. Gone as in not here. No body. Whoever took her out of here either grabbed her or— He crouched near the scuff marks on the floor near column 3. The pattern wasn't right for a struggle. The scuff marks were directional, purposeful. Or helped her. "Is that her shoes?" He looked at the 2 heels sitting near the base of the column. "Yeah." So someone got her out. Someone who knew what they were doing. Marcus stood up slowly, scanning the room again. "Pull the employee lot footage. I want to see who left the building in the last 20 minutes. Logan's car was a 2009 Ford Escape with a cracked dashboard and a rear wiper that didn't work properly. He'd driven worse. He pulled out of the lot with his lights on like a normal person, kept to the speed limit, took surface streets instead of the highway because cameras on ramps were positioned to capture plates. Victoria sat in the passenger seat with her knees pressed together and her arms crossed over her chest, watching the city go by. She'd said almost nothing since the loading dock. He didn't push it. People needed time to process, and forcing conversation before someone was ready produced garbage, fragments, and fear dressed up as information. He was 2 miles from this tower when she said, "There was a bodyguard, Raymond. He was supposed to be in the garage." "I didn't see a bodyguard. He's been with me for 4 years." She uncrossed her arms. "If something happened to him, let's find out first before you go there." She looked at him directly for what he realized was the first time. "Who are you?" "Logan Mercer. I've been on the maintenance crew at the tower for about 7 months." "That's your name." "That's not what I asked." He watched the road. A light turned yellow ahead, and he slowed instead of running it. "Someone who's dealt with people like that before." "Military." "Yeah." "Special operations." He didn't answer. She took the non-answer and kept going. "Navy?" "Why Navy specifically?" "The way you moved in that corridor. I've seen footage of close protection details, security briefings, things like that. Most of them move in straight lines. You kept angling, and when you grabbed me, you used my momentum instead of stopping it." She paused. "That's a specific kind of training." He glanced at her. She was looking at him with an expression that was exhausted and sharp at the same time. "You're observant." "I run a $17 billion company. I'm very observant." "A beat." "I just usually don't have to observe whether or not someone is actively trying to kill me." He almost smiled. It didn't quite get there. "Navy SEALs, 8 years. I've been out for 4. "Why are you mopping floors?" "Because it pays enough and it gives me time to be home before my daughter goes to bed." That landed differently than he expected. She went quiet again, but it was a different quality of quiet. "How old?" 7. She turned back to the window. After a moment, "Where are we going?" "Safe house. I know a place." "You have a safe house." "I have a few." She absorbed that. "Is this normal for you, keeping safe houses and knowing about shooting angles and—" "No." He said it flatly. "No, it's not normal. I haven't done anything like tonight in a long time, and I'd very much like to go back to not doing anything like tonight." He changed lanes. "But that's not the situation we're in." She didn't argue with that. He appreciated it. They were 3 miles further on when his phone buzzed in the cup holder, a number he hadn't seen in 2 years. He picked it up, held it without answering for 1 second. Answered. "I know," said the voice on the other end. It was his former team sergeant, Dan Kowalski, now somewhere in federal contracting. "I just saw the chatter come across. You good?" "For now." "She with you?" "Yeah." "Okay." A pause. "Logan?" They had inside information. The security detail that was supposed to be in that garage tonight was pulled 2 hours before. Someone moved them. Logan's jaw tightened. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing following. "How deep does it go?" "I don't know yet. But you need to assume you can't trust anyone connected to that company. Anyone." He looked at Victoria. She was watching him with those sharp, exhausted eyes. "Understood," he said, and hung up. The safe house was a rented storage unit on the city's south side that Logan had quietly converted over several months. A cot, a lockbox, a prepaid laptop, a basic first aid kit, and enough canned food and water to last 4 days. It was ugly and cold and smelled like motor oil, but nobody knew it existed and nobody could trace it to him. He'd never once thought he'd actually use it. He unlocked the door and pulled the cord on the single work light. Victoria walked in, looked around the space, and said nothing for a long moment. "I've stayed in worse," she finally said. "You have?" "Dorm room, sophomore year." She looked at the cot. "At least that had a window." He set the lockbox on the floor and opened it, pulling out the prepaid laptop and a burner phone. He handed her the phone. "If you need to make a call, use this. Don't touch your personal phone. They can track it." She took it. "My father. I need to tell someone to check on my father." "Who do you trust?" "Someone completely outside the company." She thought about it. The hesitation told him how limited the answer was. My father's personal physician, Dr. Anita Soren. She's been treating him for years. She doesn't work for the company. She never has. Call her. Tell her to stay with him, and don't let anyone from Blackwood Global near him. Don't explain more than that. Victoria looked at him. You think they'd go after him? I don't know. But if someone inside that company is willing to stage an assassination in a parking garage, I'm not ruling anything out. She stared at the burner phone for a moment. Then she called. While she talked, Logan opened the prepaid laptop and started working through what he knew. Professional team, coordinated positions, inside information about her route and security schedule. This wasn't a robbery or a random act. Somebody had wanted Victoria Hale either dead or taken, and they'd spent real money on the people they hired to do it. The question was who inside Blackwood Global had that kind of money, that kind of motive, and that kind of access. He was still turning that over when Victoria ended her call and sat down on the edge of the cot. Dr. Soren is with him, she said. He's okay. Good. Silence settled between them. Outside, somewhere distant, a siren moved through the city and faded. You should sleep, Logan said. I won't be able to sleep. Try anyway. Your body needs it, even if your brain disagrees. She looked at him with something that wasn't quite irritation and wasn't quite respect. A mix of both. Do you always give orders like that? Old habit, he paused. You can ignore it. I'll keep that option available. But she did lie down, still in her work clothes, her arms straight at her sides, staring at the ceiling. He pulled the lockbox close and started thinking through the next steps. Moving locations, reaching out to the right people without exposing their position, figuring out where the threat was coming from before it found them again. At some point in the next hour, without meaning to, Victoria fell asleep. He sat there in the low light, listening to the city outside, and thought about Sophie waking up tomorrow and not finding him home. He'd already sent a text to his neighbor, Mrs. Grabowski, before they'd left the garage area. Running late. Can Sophie stay tonight? The woman was 63 years old and fed his daughter homemade pierogi whenever she babysat, so he knew Sophie was fine. But fine was different from with him. He pushed the feeling down where it needed to go and focused on the laptop screen. Someone inside Blackwood Global Tower wanted Victoria Hale dead, and that someone didn't know yet that the invisible janitor from the third floor was now the only thing standing between her and whatever came next. He was still awake at 4 in the morning when the laptop pinged. Logan had been running searches for the past 3 hours, cross-referencing what little he knew about the hit team with databases he still had quiet access to through a contact at a private security firm in Virginia. Old favors from old times. The kind of thing you didn't advertise but didn't throw away either, because you never quite knew when the past was going to come looking for you. Tonight it had, and he was grateful for every connection he'd kept alive. The ping was from Dan Kowalski. A single encrypted file, no message attached. Logan opened it, read through the contents twice, and sat back in the folding chair with the kind of stillness that wasn't peace. It was the stillness of a man absorbing something worse than he expected. The hit team was freelance, Eastern European contractors who moved through 3 different countries under different names, available to whoever paid the right number. They'd been hired through a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands 18 months ago, which meant this wasn't a sudden decision. Somebody had been planning this for a long time, somebody patient, somebody careful, somebody who worked on the 43rd floor of Blackwood Global Tower. He closed the laptop and looked at Victoria. She was still asleep on the cot, one arm folded under her head, her suit jacket pulled over her shoulders like a blanket. She'd kicked off her remaining stocking at some point, and her hair had come loose from whatever arrangement it had been in. She looked younger like this, less like a CEO and more like a person who'd had a terrible night and finally surrendered to exhaustion. He let her sleep another hour. When she woke, it was because a truck outside backfired and she came up fast, eyes open and startled, hand reaching for something that wasn't there. Then she saw Logan sitting across from her with 2 cups of instant coffee he'd made on a small camp burner, and she let out a long breath through her nose. How long was I out? She said. About 4 hours. She sat up slowly, rubbing the back of her neck. You didn't sleep. I was working. She took the coffee he offered without asking what kind it was or whether there was anything else available. Another thing he noted without saying anything about. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at him over the rim. Tell me what you found. so he told her. He kept it linear. The shell company, the contractors, the timeline. He watched her face as he talked. She was good at keeping it neutral, but not perfect. When he got to the 18-month timeline, something shifted in her eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. 18 months ago, she said. You know what happened then? My father had his first episode. She set the coffee down on the floor beside the cot. We thought it was a minor stroke. The doctors weren't entirely sure. He started becoming confused, losing track of things. It was gradual at first. She paused. He stepped back from the board 6 months later. Someone had to take formal control of his shares while he recovered. Who managed that transition? She looked at him. Damian Graves? The name sat in the air between them. Logan had already pulled what he could on Damian Graves in the past few hours. Chief Operating Officer. 22 years with the company, the last 8 at the executive level. Impeccable reputation, spotless public record. The kind of man who showed up at charity events and industry conferences and always said exactly the right thing to exactly the right people. The kind of man nobody looked at too hard because he'd spent decades making sure there was nothing visible to look at. How well do you know him? Logan asked. Well enough to have trusted him. Her voice didn't change much, but the flatness that came into it said everything. He's been with the company since before I came back from business school. My father brought him in personally. Always said Damian was the steadiest person in any room. A short pause. I've had meetings with him twice a week for 3 years. Has he ever pushed back on your decisions? Things involving finances, external partnerships, anything like that? She thought about it. There were a few acquisition deals I killed that he'd been championing, and last year I hired an outside auditing firm to review our subsidiary accounts. He wasn't happy about it. Her eyes sharpened. He said it would make the board nervous, create the impression we were investigating ourselves. I thought it was just political caution. She picked up the coffee again. I went ahead with the audit anyway. The firm completed it and flagged 2 irregularities in overseas accounts. Damian personally explained both of them away. I accepted the explanations because the dollar amounts seemed manageable. What were the accounts connected to? Infrastructure contracts in Southeast Asia, port development. She stopped. Logan, how much are we actually talking about? I don't have numbers yet, but the shell company that hired your hit team had subsidiaries in 3 different countries. The structure of it, the way the entities were layered, it's not something you build to handle one transaction. That's architecture for sustained movement of money over years. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her put it together, piece by piece, the way someone does when they already have most of the picture, and just needed someone to hand them the last few pieces to confirm what they were afraid to believe. He's been using the company, she said. It wasn't a question. That's what it looks like. For how long? I don't know, long enough to get very good at hiding it. Logan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Victoria, the audit you commissioned, did the outside firm retain copies of their raw findings? They should have. By contract, they're required to keep records for 7 years. I need you to think carefully. Is there anyone at that firm, not someone Blackwood Global introduced you to, someone you knew independently, who you could contact without it going through the company's channels? She thought for a moment. The lead auditor, Carol Wren. I've known her for a long time. We went to the same graduate program. I hired her company specifically because I trusted her personally. A pause. She had concerns about those accounts. Damian's explanation smoothed things over for the official report, but Carol told me privately she wasn't entirely satisfied. I asked her to document her concerns and hold them. She still has that? If she's smart, and she is, yes. Okay. Logan stood up, moving toward the lockbox. We need to get to a second location. This place is clean, but it's been 12 hours, and I don't like staying anywhere more than 12 hours when I don't know how many people are looking. He started pulling items from the lockbox. The burner phone, a small amount of cash, a prepaid transit card. But before we move, there's something else. What? He set a folded piece of paper on the cot beside her. She picked it up and unfolded it. It was a printout of a photo, slightly grainy from the storage unit's printer, but clear enough. A man in a hospital corridor, talking to another man whose back was to the camera. That's from the security footage of the medical center where your father's been receiving treatment, Logan said. Dan pulled it this morning. The man your father's doctor is talking to That's not a hospital employee. He's not on any staff roster. The visit isn't logged. Victoria stared at the photo for a long time. When was this taken? 3 weeks ago. My father's been having good days and bad days. The doctor said the pattern was consistent with his condition. She set the photo down carefully. Or consistent with something else affecting his condition. I'm not a doctor. I can't tell you what that means medically, but I can tell you that man in the photo has no legitimate reason to be in that corridor. She stood up from the cot, fully upright, shoulders back, the exhaustion still visible in the lines around her eyes, but something else there now. The kind of cold clarity that comes when grief and fury reach the same temperature and cancel each other out. Where's the second location? She said. About 40 minutes from here, and we need to make one stop on the way. She looked at him. Your daughter? Yeah. You weren't going to explain that. I was about to. She held his gaze for a moment. Go get her, obviously. Mrs. Grabowski's apartment smelled like coffee cake and something simmering on the stove. She opened the door at 7:15 in the morning and looked at Logan with the particular expression of a 63-year-old woman who had seen enough of life to recognize when a man was holding something very heavy. She's fine, she said immediately. She slept well. She asked if you were on an adventure. Something in his chest moved in a way he didn't have time for. What did you tell her? I said yes, and that you'd be back soon. Mrs. Grabowski glanced past him to the hallway, where Victoria stood a respectful distance back, arms folded, doing a careful job of looking like she wasn't listening. Is everything all right, Logan? Getting there, he said. I might need Sophie to stay flexible for a couple of days. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't. She can stay as long as she needs. The old woman patted his arm once. She's already asked me to teach her how to make bigos. We have a full agenda. He felt something that might have been gratitude and didn't know how to put it anywhere useful. Thank you. Sophie appeared in the hallway behind Mrs. Grabowski in her pajamas, hair going in 3 directions, holding the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2 years old. She looked at her father with the kind of total body relief that only 7-year-olds are capable of fully expressing. Dad. She crossed the space between them and hit him at the waist. He crouched down and held her. She smelled like syrup and sleep and the lavender shampoo he bought in bulk because she'd decided 2 years ago it was the only kind she liked. I'm here, he said. I'm right here. Mrs. Grabowski said you were on an adventure. Kind of. She pulled back and looked at his face with the scrutiny that children apply when they know something is being edited. You look tired. I'm okay. You always say that. Because I'm usually okay. He smoothed her hair back from her forehead. I need you to stay with Mrs. Grabowski for a little while longer. Just a couple days. How come? Work stuff. Complicated grown-up work stuff. Sophie looked past him, and Logan followed her gaze to where Victoria was standing in the hallway. The two of them regarded each other with the careful assessment of people who don't know the rules yet. Who's that? Sophie said. Someone I work with. Victoria took a step forward. She hesitated, not dramatically, just genuinely, and then crouched down to Sophie's level. Hi, I'm Victoria. Your dad helped me out last night. Sophie considered this seriously. With what? Some people were bothering me, and he made them stop. That's what he does, Sophie said with complete confidence. He's good at that. Victoria glanced up at Logan with an expression he couldn't read all the way. Yeah, she said. I noticed. Sophie held out the stuffed rabbit. This is Ernest. He's good at making people feel better if you're scared. Something shifted in Victoria's face, brief and unguarded, like a window that opened and then closed again quickly. She put her hand out and let Sophie place the rabbit in it. She looked at it for a second. Thank you, Victoria said. That's very kind. You can give him back when you're done being scared, Sophie told her, completely matter-of-fact. Logan stood up, kissed the top of Sophie's head, and made himself walk back down the hallway before the moment could get any longer than he could afford. The second safe house was a rented room above a dry cleaning business, in a neighborhood where nobody paid attention to unfamiliar cars. Logan had the key under a false name. He paid cash 6 months in advance, once a year, and the owner, a retired postal worker named Gil, who was legally blind in one eye and philosophically inclined toward minding his own business, had never asked a single question. The room had 2 windows, both facing the alley. It was small, and it was functional, and it had a decent wireless signal, which was currently the most important thing. Logan set up the prepaid laptop on the folding table while Victoria sat on the edge of the second chair and called Carol Wren on the burner phone. He listened to one side of the conversation while his hands moved on the keyboard. "Carol, it's Victoria. I need you to listen carefully, and I need you not to say my name on your end." A pause. "Yes, something has happened, and I need to know if you still have the supplemental documentation from the Blackwood audit." Another pause. Longer. "Okay, don't send it anywhere yet. Don't email it. Can you put it on a physical drive and get it out of your office? Today." She listened. "I'll tell you where when I know where that is. Carol, be careful. I mean that literally. Don't tell anyone you heard from me." She ended the call and looked at Logan. "She has it. 40 pages of raw data she never included in the official report. Transactions flagged for irregular timing and routing patterns through 3 subsidiary accounts. That's something." He pulled up a financial registry search he'd queued. "I've been tracing the shell company backward. The Cayman entity has 2 parent structures, both registered in Cyprus. One of them has a board member whose name appears on a separate company that filed a licensing agreement with Blackwood Global's Southeast Asia division 4 years ago." He turned the screen toward her. "This name." She looked at it. Her jaw tightened. "That's Damien's brother-in-law." "Yeah." She sat back. "He's been routing company money through a family-controlled entity, and nobody caught it. The audit would have caught it if somebody hadn't gotten in front of it first." Logan closed the search window. "Damien knew the audit was coming because you told him. He had time to prepare the explanations, move what needed to be moved, make the visible numbers add up." "How much?" she said again. "Roughly. Based on what I can trace without access to the actual account data? Conservative estimate, somewhere between 40 and 60 million over a decade, possibly more." She absorbed that. Her expression didn't collapse. It compacted. "My father built that company from 23 employees in a leased office in Columbus. It took him 30 years. She looked at the table. "And Damien has been... for how long?" "The earliest transaction I can find traces to 12 years ago. Small amounts at first. It escalated around the time your father started delegating more authority." Logan watched her face. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just keep going." She straightened. "What do we do with Carol's documentation? We need one more piece before we go anywhere with it. The accounting records alone are enough to get federal attention, but what we really need is something that connects Damien directly to last night. Something that links the shell company and the hit team back to him personally, not just to corporate accounts he could claim ignorance about." He paused. "Your bodyguard, Raymond, you said he'd been with you for 4 years." "Yes." Dan confirmed this morning that Raymond was found in a utility room on level 2 of the parking garage. He'd been hit with something, not a bullet. He's alive, but he was unconscious when they found him. Victoria exhaled slowly. "He's alive. He's at a private hospital. He's stable." Logan met her eyes. "Victoria, someone had to pull his assignment from the rotation last night and replace him with people who weren't actually there. That order had to come from inside building security. Security reports to operations. Operations reports to the COO." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Moved Raymond. He cleared the garage. That's what it looks like. And if we can find the internal communication that authorized that change, an email, a memo, anything, that's the thread that connects Damien directly to last night. Our internal communications are archived on the company's servers, which we can't access directly without alerting IT. But I have an executive override credential," she said. "I never revoked it. I never had a reason to. If you use it from an external device, will it log your location?" She thought about it. "It logs the device ID, not the physical location." "Then we'd need a clean device, something that's never been associated with you or the company." He was already thinking through the options. "I know someone, former Signals Intelligence. She owes me a favor, and she's in the city." "You have a lot of people who owe you favors. I spent 8 years collecting them. Some of them have finally become useful." He stood up and started pulling on his jacket. "Her name is Nadia. She doesn't ask questions, which is its own kind of valuable." "Logan." Victoria's voice stopped him. He looked back. "Sophie's rabbit. She gave it to me without even thinking about it, a child she'd never met. She held his gaze. Your daughter trusts people very easily. She gets that from her mother, he said. He said it straight, without flinching, but it landed somewhere and he felt the weight of it for a second. Her mother was the most open person I ever knew. Sophie inherited it directly. Victoria didn't push further. She just nodded. I'll carry it carefully. I know you will. Well, Nadia Volkov was 41 years old, 5'4", and had once spent 11 months embedded with a joint intelligence task force operating across 2 continents under a cover identity so deep that even her direct supervisor had to use a special protocol to confirm she was one of theirs. She'd been out of that world for 3 years and currently ran a small cybersecurity consulting firm from an apartment in Lincoln Park that was, to the untrained eye, completely unremarkable. To the trained eye, the apartment had 4 separate hardwired internet connections, a Faraday room the size of a closet, and a refrigerator that was mostly backup drives. She opened the door when Logan knocked and looked at him, then at Victoria, then back at him. You look terrible, she said. Thanks, Nadia. I mean it kindly. Come in. The apartment was warm and smelled like strong tea. Nadia cleared a pile of equipment manuals from the couch without being asked and gestured for them to sit. She was already looking at Victoria with the direct, non-performative assessment of someone who cataloged people for professional reasons. Hail, she said. I've seen you in business coverage. I'd prefer to be less visible right now, Victoria said. Yes, I imagine. Nadia sat across from them and folded her hands in her lap. Logan, what do you need? A clean device, laptop or tablet, doesn't matter, with no identifiable history, and a signal router that scrubs origin points. And you need this for what purpose? Accessing archived corporate communications. Legally? She's the CEO. It's her company. Nadia looked at Victoria. Are you the CEO? Technically still, Victoria said. Nothing has formally changed. Close enough. Nadia uncrossed her hands and stood up. Give me 15 minutes. While she disappeared into the back room, Logan sat on the couch and felt, for the first time since the parking garage, the full accumulated weight of the past 18 hours pressing down on him. His eyes wanted to close. He didn't let them. You should eat something, Victoria said. I'm fine. You said that to me 8 hours ago about sleep and you were right. I'm returning the favor. He looked at her. She'd found a rubber band somewhere, probably her own pocket, and pulled her hair back, which made her look less like she'd been through something terrible and more like she was in the middle of managing something very complex. Which, he supposed, she was. There's food in my bag, he said. Side pocket. She dug into it without ceremony and came out with 2 protein bars and a bag of trail mix that had been in there long enough that Logan honestly couldn't remember when he'd put it in. She handed him one of the protein bars. He took it. They sat there in Nadia's living room eating protein bars at 8 in the morning, and it was absurd enough that something almost like a laugh moved through him. He caught it before it got anywhere. What? Victoria said. Nothing. You almost smiled. I didn't. You were close. She bit into her own protein bar. For what it's worth, this is the strangest morning of my professional career. How long is your professional career? I started working in the business at 22. So 8 years as an actual executive, 12 if you count the years before I had a real title. And this beats everything. This beats everything significantly. She looked at him. How are you this calm? I'm not calm. I'm just trained to look calm. What's the difference? Calm is when you're not afraid. Looking calm is when you're afraid, and you choose where you put it. He finished the protein bar and folded the wrapper carefully. You can't make good decisions when fear is running the room. So you acknowledge it, and you put it somewhere you can pick up later, and then you do your job. She considered that for a moment. I've been doing something like that my whole career, I just never heard it described that way. Nadia came back with a tablet in a plain black case and a small cylindrical device that she set on the coffee table. Signal router, bounces through 4 nodes before it exits, and the exit points rotate on a 7-minute cycle. Anyone trying to trace the origin will spend a very unpleasant afternoon. She handed Victoria the tablet. Your credentials will work through a standard browser. Log in, find what you need, download nothing directly, screenshot or photograph the screen. Do not enter any search terms that could flag a security audit on their end. I know how to move quietly through my own systems, Victoria said. Nadia looked at Logan. I like her. I'm starting to also, Logan said, and didn't look at Victoria when he said it. Victoria logged into the archive with the executive credential. Her hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years navigating complex administrative systems. She went directly to Building Security's internal communication log, filtered by date, 2 days before the parking garage, and started working backward. It took her 6 minutes. The email was there, sent from a private address that wasn't a Blackwood Global domain, routed through a forwarding service, but received into the Building Security Operations inbox at 3:47 p.m. on the day of the attack. It reassigned Raymond Webb's parking garage rotation to a different officer, an officer who did not, when Logan cross-referenced the name against the employee roster, actually exist in the company's HR records. A ghost assignment, created for one purpose. Victoria photographed every page of the email thread. Her hand was completely steady. "That's it," Logan said quietly. "Yes," she said. She logged out and handed the tablet back to Nadia. Then she sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and looked at the middle distance. "Damien's been in my office twice a week for 3 years," she said. "He came to my father's birthday dinner last spring. He shook my father's hand and said—" She stopped, started again. "He said he was grateful for everything Edward had built, that the company was his legacy." She shook her head slowly. "My father smiled the whole time. He was so proud to have Damien there." Logan said nothing. There was nothing useful to say to that. "I want him to answer for it," she said. "Not emotional, precise. All of it. Every dollar, every decision, every person he hurt, or bought, or removed. I want it to come down on him completely." "It will," Logan said, "but not yet. We're not ready yet." She looked at him. "How close are we?" "We have the financial trail, we have the internal communication, and we have Carol's audit data. We need one more thing, something that directly connects the contractors who came after you to Damien's personal authorization, not just his company access." He leaned forward. "The contractors were hired 18 months ago. Someone communicated with them. There are messages somewhere. We just need to find them." "The flash drive," Nadia said. They both looked at her. She'd been sitting quietly across the room, tea in hand, listening. "The contractor's that professional. They keep records. It's leverage. In case a client tries to disappear them without paying." Nadia sipped her tea calmly. "If there's a flash drive connected to this operation and you actually have it, there may be communications on it that the contractors archive themselves. Insurance files. Professionals always keep insurance." Logan and Victoria looked at each other. "Raymond," Victoria said, "before they got to him in the garage, you said they found him in the utility room." "Yes." "Raymond carried everything. He was meticulous. He had a procedure for every scenario." She sat forward. "Logan, he would have dropped something. If he knew something was wrong, if he had any warning at all, he would have dropped it somewhere retrievable." "The utility room on level 2, Logan said. "He knew every inch of that building. He knew that utility room had a maintenance gap behind the eastern wall panel. There was a plumbing access cavity. He showed it to me once." She was already standing. "He would have left it there if he had the chance." Logan looked at Nadia. Nadia set down her tea. "I'll drive." Getting back into Blackwood Global Tower without being flagged took 30 minutes of planning and 8 minutes of execution. Nadia parked 2 blocks away. Logan went in through the loading dock using his maintenance keycard, which, to his knowledge, hadn't been deactivated yet, either through oversight or because nobody had connected the janitor on the 3rd floor to what had happened in the parking garage, and took the service elevator to the 2nd level. The utility room was still taped with security tape from the investigation the night before, but the tape was across the door handle, and the door itself could be opened if you used the maintenance override panel to the left, which Logan knew about and building security apparently hadn't thought to disable. He was inside in 40 seconds. The eastern wall panel was exactly where Victoria had described. He found the plumbing access cavity, reached into the gap behind a loop of copper piping, and his fingers found the small hard rectangle of a flash drive. He was back in Nadia's car 11 minutes later. He held it up. Victoria looked at it like it was something that had been underwater for a long time and had finally surfaced. "Raymond," she said quietly. "He was thinking clearly under pressure," Logan said. "You hired good people. Not good enough people to protect himself. He's alive. That's the job." He put the drive in his pocket. Now we find out what's on it. Nadia was already pulling into traffic. My apartment. 30 minutes. Logan leaned back against the headrest and let himself close his eyes for 60 seconds. In those 60 seconds, he thought about Sophie giving a stranger her stuffed rabbit without a second thought, and about a parking garage and a bent mop handle, and about a man with 22 years in a company sitting across from a board on the 33rd floor, perfectly composed, perfectly trusted, while somewhere in a layered architecture of offshore accounts and ghost employees and reassigned bodyguards, the machinery he'd built kept turning. Not for much longer. He opened his eyes. Nadia, he said, how fast can you decrypt an unknown drive? Depends on the encryption. Assume it's good. Then 2 hours if I'm lucky, 6 if I'm not. Start as soon as we're in the door. Obviously, she said, and changed lanes. Nadia cracked the drive in 3 hours and 40 minutes, which she described as acceptable, in the tone of someone who considered anything under 2 hours a personal achievement and anything over 6 a professional embarrassment. They were all sitting in the Faraday room when the directory opened on her screen. The folder structure inside the drive was clean and deliberate, not the kind of organization that came from a person who was nervous or in a hurry. Raymond Webb had been thorough even when he was about to be ambushed in a parking utility room, and that thoroughness now sat on Nadia's monitor in 17 folders, each labeled with dates and abbreviated codes that took Logan about 4 minutes to work out the logic of. Raymond had been keeping his own records for at least 8 months, quietly, carefully, the way a man does when he suspects something is wrong but can't yet prove it and doesn't know who to tell. The first 11 folders were mostly photographs, surveillance shots taken on a phone, the angles slightly imperfect in the way that suggested they were taken quickly and from positions of cover, board members in conversations they hadn't announced. Vehicles parked outside Blackwood Global at hours that didn't match any scheduled meetings. A man Logan didn't recognize meeting with Damian Graves at a restaurant 3 blocks from the tower, the kind of lunch that looked like a business lunch until you noticed that neither of them had touched their food. Logan zoomed in on the unknown man's face and sent the image to Dan Kowalski without explanation. Dan's response came back in 22 minutes. The name attached to it belonged to a logistics coordinator for a private maritime shipping company with contracts across 4 countries. The company's ownership structure, when Logan spent another 40 minutes pulling it apart, routed back through a holding entity registered in Cyprus. The same Cyprus. He showed Nadia. She nodded slowly, the way people do when a thing they suspected has been confirmed. The 12th folder was different. It contained a single encrypted subfolder that required a separate password. Nadia looked at it, cracked her knuckles, and spent the next hour on it while Logan and Victoria ate whatever was in Nadia's kitchen: crackers, cold rice from a container, 2 apples, sitting at the small table without talking very much. The silence between them had changed over the past 24 hours. It was no longer the silence of 2 strangers managing an emergency. It had become something quieter and more settled, the kind that exists between people who have seen each other under enough pressure that the usual social performances have stopped mattering. At some point, Victoria said, "You're good at waiting. I've had practice." "Does it get easier?" "The waiting part, yes. The not knowing part, no." He looked at her. "You're not bad at it yourself." "I'm terrible at it. I'm just not showing it." She turned the apple core in her hands. 12 hours ago, I was sitting in my office preparing for a board presentation on Q3 capital allocation. I had notes. I had talking points. She set the core down. Now I'm eating crackers in a cybersecurity expert's kitchen, trying to figure out who in my company wants me dead. The Q3 presentation can wait. Funny, but there was a thin edge of genuine black humor in it. She looked at him directly. "Sophie's mother. You don't have to answer this." "I know." "What was her name?" "A beat." "Claire." "How long ago?" 4 years. Ovarian cancer. It moved fast. Diagnosis to the end was 8 months. He said it plainly, the way a person says something they've said enough times that the words no longer ambush them, even if the thing behind the words still does occasionally. Sophie was 3. She doesn't remember much. Enough to know she had a mother. Not enough to miss her the specific way that's the worst kind of missing. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Do you?" "Every day? Less sharp than it used to be." He folded his hands on the table. She would have thought this entire situation was either terrifying or fascinating. Probably both. She sounds like someone worth knowing. She was. He paused. She never would have let me quit. I separated from the SEALs right before the diagnosis. I had plans. Consulting, private sector work, things that would have put me in a different tax bracket. When she got sick, all of that stopped mattering, and then she was gone, and He stopped. Sophie needed a father who was actually present, so I found work that let me be present. The janitor job wasn't what I planned, but Sophie goes to bed knowing where I am. That was enough for a while. And now? He looked at her evenly. And now I'm sitting in a Faraday room waiting for a decrypted flash drive to tell me who tried to have you killed. So the plan has evolved. She almost smiled. It wasn't quite there, but it was close. I never planned to run a company at 30 either. My father got sick and someone had to hold it together. How old were you? 28. I'd been working in the company for 3 years, mostly in product development. I wasn't supposed to be the one in that chair. She glanced at the floor. I used to think about the things I was going to do before I got pulled back in. Travel. A proper apartment instead of the company housing they put me in that first year. A dog, eventually. She laughed briefly at herself. I never got the dog. Sophie would approve of a dog. Sophie seems like someone whose approval matters. More than most people's, he said. Nadia appeared in the doorway. Folders open, she said. Oh. The subfolder contained 43 files. Encrypted message threads, payment authorizations in PDF format, and 3 audio recordings of varying lengths. Nadia had the first recording playing within 30 seconds. The voice quality was slightly compressed, the way recordings sound when they're captured on a device that wasn't designed for the purpose. But the voices were clear enough. The first voice was Damian Graves. Logan had heard Graves speak twice in the building, once at an all-staff meeting that Logan had been cleaning a room adjacent to, and once in the lobby making a phone call that was louder than it needed to be. The cadence was the same, measured, authoritative, the kind of voice that had spent decades being taken seriously. The second voice was the man from the restaurant photograph. The conversation was practical and brief. Dates, amounts, a reference to the transition schedule that meant nothing without context and everything with it. At one point, Damien said clearly, and without any notable emotion, the audit issue has been managed, but if the position changes, the asset becomes a liability, and the liability needs to be resolved. The asset. Logan looked at Victoria. Her face had gone very still. The recording was dated 14 months ago. The third audio file was 7 minutes long and more explicit. It had been recorded more recently, 3 weeks ago, based on the file timestamp. The same 2 voices. The same careful vocabulary of a man who never said anything directly, if he could help it. But this time the indirection was thin enough that it barely obscured the content. A timeline. A description of a window of opportunity. A reference to the parking level and the rotation change. When it finished, the room was quiet. That's enough for a federal case, Nadia said. She wasn't asking. Yes, Victoria said. Her voice was flat in a way that wasn't calm at all. That's enough. She stood up from the chair. He called me an asset. She said it not with disbelief, but with a slow, deep fury that had nowhere to go yet. 22 years he worked alongside my family, and he called me an asset that needed to be resolved. Logan let her stand with that for a moment before he said, There's still more of the folder. I know, I'll look. She sat back down. She was visibly working to pull herself back into functional range. He recognized the effort. He'd made it himself enough times. She pulled the folder toward her and opened the remaining files herself. Logan watched her face change as she moved through them. Financial records, a lot of which confirmed and expanded what they'd already established. Correspondence that added detail to the corporate fraud architecture. Authorization chains that put Damien's name at the center of decisions that had been attributed to other executives. She got to the last file. A scanned document, 7 pages. She read the first page and stopped. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Victoria, Logan said, give me a minute. He gave her the minute. Then 2. Nadia had quietly moved to the other side of the room and was doing something at her secondary workstation. My mother died when I was 10, Victoria said. Her voice had changed, lower. Something in it that hadn't been there before. Car accident. Highway, early morning. The official report said she lost control in wet conditions. She set the document down on the desk carefully. I've read that report. I've read it 3 times in my life because every few years I go back to it, and I don't know why. There was nothing in it that suggested anything other than an accident. Logan looked at the scanned document. It was a private investigator's report, commissioned and paid for by an entity Logan didn't recognize. Dated 7 years ago. The PI had spent 4 months reconstructing the circumstances of Margaret Hale's death, with access to records that weren't part of the official investigation. Maintenance logs from the vehicle, cell tower data, a witness statement from a gas station attendant who had seen the car that morning and who hadn't been contacted by the original investigators. The conclusion was careful and qualified, the way professional investigators write when they don't have proof but they have enough to be disturbed. A brake system failure consistent with tampering rather than wear. A 3-hour gap in the vehicle's location data the night before the accident that placed it somewhere other than the Hale family residence. And a notation that the person who had arranged the servicing of the family's vehicles at that time, through a company whose billing routed through a Blackwood Global Operations account, had been, for the past 12 years, operating under the direct authority of the Chief Operating Officer. The PI had never filed this report with law enforcement. He had been paid to deliver it to a private client. Raymond Webb had somehow obtained a copy. Logan read it through twice. Then he looked at Victoria. She was sitting perfectly upright with her hands flat on the table. "He killed her," she said. "He killed my mother, and he spent 20 years watching my father fall apart over it, and he sat at our dinner table, and he shook my father's hand, and he—" Her voice caught. Just once. She pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose. "He poisoned my father. He killed my mother. He stole the company and then tried to kill me." She turned and looked at Logan. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. It was the look of someone who was choosing, very deliberately, not to cry yet. "I want to destroy him." "I know. I don't mean the legal process. I mean I want to look him in the face when it comes down." "We can arrange that." Logan said it quietly. "But not the way you're thinking right now. If we go at him directly, we lose everything we have. He'll bury it, he'll run, or he'll come at us harder and faster, and this time we won't have a parking garage column to get behind." He kept his voice level. "The evidence does more damage than anything you or I could physically do to him. It destroys him completely and permanently. Violence ends with lawyers. Evidence ends with a cell." She stared at the table for a long moment. "I know you're right," she said. "I hate that you're right. It happens." Something moved through her face, grief and fury fighting for the same square inch. And then she pulled both hands back into her lap and looked at him with a kind of exhausted steadiness. "What's next?" "We need to get out of the city. Whoever Damien's working with knows by now that last night didn't go according to plan. They'll be adjusting. The longer we stay in a fixed location, the more time they have to find us." He thought through the options. "I have a place. It's been a long time since I've used it, which means it shouldn't be on anyone's list. It's about 6 hours north." "How remote?" "Remote enough." "Winter cabin?" "Cabin. Not winter yet, but the forecast has a storm system moving in, which is actually useful. It slows pursuit more than it slows us." He glanced at Nadia. "Can you package everything we have and put it on a secure server that's not connected to anything traceable?" "It'll take me 2 hours." Nadia was already pulling drives from a cabinet. "I'll set up 3 separate backups on different server chains. Anyone trying to access them without the key will trigger a data corruption protocol." "Good." He stood up. "I need to call Dan, and I need to check on Sophie." "I'll copy everything to a physical drive for you to carry," Nadia said, "and one for me to hold separately, belt and suspenders." 2 belts, Logan said. "Suspenders and a rope." Nadia almost smiled. "Go make your calls." He called Mrs. Grabowski first. Sophie was apparently in the middle of learning to make cabbage rolls and was, by Mrs. Grabowski's assessment, a natural and very serious about the rolling technique. Logan stayed on the call for 3 minutes, listened to Sophie explain at some length that the trick was even pressure distributed across the whole hand, and told her he loved her and that he'd be back as soon as he could. "Are you still on the adventure?" Sophie asked. "Still on it." "Is the lady still with you?" He glanced through the door to where Victoria was sitting. "Yeah." "Is she still scared?" "A little." "Tell her Ernest is very reliable," Sophie said with complete authority. "I'll let her know." He called Dan next. Dan was already ahead of him. Federal contacts had been quietly notified that something involving Blackwood Global required a careful look, without specifics and without names. The groundwork was being laid. But Dan also had something less reassuring. Logan, Damian Graves hasn't been seen at his office since yesterday afternoon. He left early, before the garage incident. His assistant told building security he had a private medical appointment. He knew it might not work. He had a contingency. These people always have a contingency. A pause. There's also activity on the freelance network. Someone posted a new contract in the last 4 hours. No names, but the description of the targets is specific enough. Logan's jaw tightened. How many? Can't confirm yet. At least 2 separate groups, maybe 3. They're motivated. The rate posted is double standard. Okay, he thought fast. The city isn't safe. I'm moving them north today. The mountain place? Yeah. Logan, that location is in your service record. If someone with federal access is running your background, it's listed as decommissioned, and it's been 4 years. That's not a guarantee. I know, but it's the best option I have right now. He paused. Dan, the evidence is being packaged. 2 backup servers, 1 physical drive. Can you be a 3rd holding point? Send it to me as soon as it's ready. I'll have it behind 3 separate keys. A beat. Be careful up there. Always. You're never careful. You're effective. Those are different things. Logan ended the call. They left Chicago at 2 in the afternoon in a vehicle Nadia sourced from a contact she described only as reliable in the way that really matters. It was a dark green pickup truck with 4-wheel drive and a full tank of gas, registered to a holding name that would take several days to trace back to anything. Logan drove. Victoria sat in the passenger seat with the physical drive in her jacket pocket and Raymond's stuffed rabbit sitting on the dash. She'd moved it there without comment, and Logan hadn't said anything about it either. They stopped once for fuel and food, paid cash, kept their faces away from the station's cameras without being obvious about it. Back on the road, the city fell behind them and the landscape opened up. Flat agricultural land giving way to rolling hills. The tree lines getting denser as they pushed north, the sky thickening with the cloud system that had been building since morning. Victoria slept for most of the middle 2 hours. She'd been awake for over 30 hours, and her body had apparently made a unilateral decision. Logan drove and listened to the weather on the radio, which was describing the incoming storm with the particular cheerfulness that weather forecasters use for things that are genuinely dangerous. He turned the radio off after a while and drove in the quiet. He thought about Claire, which happened less often now than it used to, but still happened whenever he was in a car alone or almost alone with the road stretching out ahead of him. Claire had loved road trips with a genuine and slightly irrational enthusiasm. She would have talked the entire drive, pointing at things, reading license plates, making up elaborate stories about the other drivers they passed. She had never once been able to maintain silence in a moving vehicle and had considered this a feature rather than a flaw. Sophie had inherited that too. He missed it more than he expected to. Victoria woke up about 40 minutes from the cabin, coming back to alertness the same way she did everything, quickly, without a gradual warm-up period. She looked out the window at the dark pines and the gray sky and said, "How much further?" 40 minutes. She nodded, looked at the dashboard, looked at Ernest the rabbit. Logan, the PI's report, the one about my mother. Yeah. Raymond had it. He'd had it long enough to store it carefully on an encrypted drive. She turned toward him. Did he know? Before everything happened, did he know what Damien had done? I don't know for certain, but Raymond was clearly gathering evidence for months. He had a reason. He glanced at her. My guess is he suspected, and he was building a case carefully because he knew if he moved too soon it would disappear. He was protecting my father, she said. He knew if it came out wrong, my father would be devastated and vulnerable at the same time. She was quiet for a moment. I need to go see my father. When this is over, I need to be there when he finds out. You will be. I don't know how you tell someone that. She looked at the road ahead. That the person who poisoned him also killed his wife 20 years ago, and that he trusted this person for decades. I don't know how you hand someone that and expect them to stay whole. You don't expect them to stay whole, Logan said. You just stay next to them while they come apart and then help them put it back together. She turned and looked at him. He felt the look but kept his eyes on the road. Is that what you did? She asked. After Claire? I tried to. Sophie did most of honestly. She was 3 and she didn't know what she was doing, but she'd climb into my lap and fall asleep. And that was usually the only thing that stopped the night from being unbearable. He paused. People think grief is about sadness. It's more disorienting than that. The world looks the same and nothing in it means what it used to mean. Food tastes wrong. You sleep 8 hours and wake up more tired than before. Everything is technically fine and nothing is actually fine. He took a breath. It gets better. Not because time heals anything, that's not quite true. It gets better because you slowly build new things that matter, and those new things start taking up the space. Victoria didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter than it usually was. My mother used to take me to this plant nursery every spring. We'd spend 2 hours walking through it, and she'd teach me the names of things. Not just the common names, the Latin names. She said if you knew what something was really called, you understood it better. She looked at her hands. I still remember about a dozen of them. I don't have a garden. I've never had one. But I know the Latin names. That's not nothing, Logan said. No, she agreed. It's not. The first flakes of snow hit the windshield about 20 minutes out. By the time Logan turned off the main road onto the unpaved track that wound up through the trees, it was coming down steadily, the headlights catching it in a moving curtain of white. The cabin sat in a clearing at the end of the track. A single-story structure, rough-hewn log exterior, a covered porch, a woodpile along the east wall that still had wood in it from the last time someone had been up here. It looked abandoned in a way that was partly deliberate. Logan had paid the property tax through a land trust for the past 4 years and told himself every year he should either use it or sell it. He'd never done either. He unlocked the front door and went in first to clear it. Old habit, no apology for it. The cabin was cold and dark and smelled like wood dust and the particular staleness of a space that had been closed for a long time. He found the circuit breaker, got the power running, found the propane line for the heating unit and lit the pilot. Victoria came in while he was getting the fire started in the wood stove. She looked around the space, main room, small kitchen, 2 doors to the back that led to a bedroom and a storage room, and didn't say anything critical about it, which he appreciated. It'll be warm in about 20 minutes, he said. I've been cold before. She sat down on the couch, which was covered with a canvas drop cloth that she didn't bother to remove. She pulled her jacket tighter. Is this where you were thinking we'd work on the next step? We lay low here for 2 or 3 days. The storm gives us cover. I get the evidence package to Dan and confirm the federal handoff is in motion. Then we figure out how to surface in a way that doesn't give Damien time to disappear first. He's already gone to ground. He won't run completely, not yet. He has assets he can't abandon. Accounts, physical assets, leverage he keeps close. Men like Damien don't leave until they're certain they're finished, and he doesn't know yet what we have. She nodded slowly. The fire was catching, the orange glow starting to push back the gray cold of the room. Outside, the snow was coming down harder. I should eat something real, she said. Is there food here? Canned goods in the back storage room. Should be enough. He stood up from the wood stove. I'll find something. I'll help. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She stood up. Logan, I'm not someone you need to manage. I'm someone you're working with. There's a difference. He looked at her for a moment. Fair enough. The storage room had canned soup, pasta, some dried beans, instant oatmeal, and a bottle of olive oil that probably still worked. They made soup on the propane stove. She found the pot, he found the bowls. They moved around each other in the small kitchen without getting in each other's way, in a manner that felt less like strangers and more like people who had somehow established the spatial vocabulary of shared work without consciously agreeing to it. They ate at the small kitchen table with the snow pressing against the window and the fire warming the main room enough that Victoria had taken off her jacket for the first time since the parking garage. She found the laptop in Logan's bag after dinner and opened it on the kitchen table. He sat across from her, and they went through the evidence files again. Not because there was new information, but because organizing it, understanding the full shape of what they had, was its own kind of necessary work. It was in this second careful pass that Victoria found the hidden folder inside the 12th file, embedded in this metadata of what appeared to be a standard financial record, a ghost folder that only showed up if you looked at the file properties rather than the file content. Nadia had cracked the main encryption but hadn't caught the embedded layer, which meant Raymond had been even more careful than any of them had realized. The ghost folder had 5 items in it. The first 4 were more of what they already had: supplemental documentation, backup copies of key files, a handwritten note from Raymond himself that appeared to be a personal record of dates and events he'd witnessed directly. The 5th item was a video file, 47 seconds long. Shot from a fixed angle, slightly elevated, the kind of footage that comes from a stationary hidden camera. Logan recognized the room immediately. It was Victoria's father's private office on the 38th floor of Blackwood Global Tower. In the footage, Edward Hale was sitting at his desk, diminished compared to the photos Logan had seen of him in his prime, but present, attentive, clearly himself in a lucid moment. Damian Graves was sitting across from him. In the footage, Damian placed something on the desk, a small bottle. He slid it across to Edward with a smile and said something about the doctor recommending it for Edward's circulation. Edward thanked him. Damian told him it was important to take it consistently for it to be effective. The timestamp in the corner of the video was 14 months ago. Victoria watched the 47 seconds twice without speaking. Then she reached out and closed the laptop with one deliberate, controlled motion. The kitchen was very quiet. The fire in the next room crackled. "He sat there," she said, "in my father's office. He sat across from my father and he handed him the thing that was making him sick, and he told him it was medicine." Logan had nothing that would help with this. He knew that. He didn't try to fill the silence. "My father trusted him completely." Her voice was controlled in the way that cost something. "He called Damian steady. He said some people just had the quality of steadiness, and it was the rarest thing in business." She pressed her lips together. He said it at Damian's face. "Victoria." "I know." She exhaled slowly. "I know what you're going to say." "I'm not going to say anything," Logan said. "I'm just going to sit here." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in a way that was fighting itself. "That might be the most useful thing anyone has offered me in the past 2 days." He stayed where he was. She sat with it for a long time, the grief and the fury and the weight of 20 years of a lie pressing down on a 10-year-old girl standing at a funeral and not understanding, and a father who spent 2 decades carrying a loss that had been manufactured, turned into a weapon, and used against him by someone he ate dinner with. She sat with all of that, and Logan let her sit with it, and the snow came down outside and the fire kept going. Eventually she said, "He's going to answer for everything." "Yes," Logan said, "he is. And I'm going to be there when he does." "I know." She pushed her chair back and stood up. She looked out the dark window at the snow for a moment, then turned back toward the main room. "I'm going to try to sleep. Wake me if anything comes through." "I will." She stopped at the kitchen doorway. She didn't turn around. "Thank you for staying." "I wasn't going anywhere," he said. She went to bed. Logan sat at the kitchen table alone with the closed laptop and the sound of the fire and the snow against the glass. And he thought about a video 47 seconds long and a man who had spent decades looking at a family he was quietly destroying and calling it loyalty. He was still sitting there thinking about it when, at 3:40 in the morning, his phone buzzed with a message from Dan Kowalski that had 3 words in it. "They found you." He was on his feet before the phone hit the table. He had 12 minutes, maybe less. Logan knew the cabin's layout by memory. Every door, every window, every angle of approach through the tree line. He'd walked it in his head 100 times over the years, the way soldiers walk spaces they might someday need to fight in, not because they expect to, but because the habit of readiness becomes its own kind of muscle. He was across the main room and pushing open the bedroom door before the phone was back in his pocket. Victoria was already sitting up. She'd slept in her clothes, practical decision whether she'd made it consciously or not. And she came awake the same way she always did, fast and without the groggy margin most people needed. "How many?" she said. "Don't know yet. Dan saw vehicle movement on a traffic camera 12 miles south, at least 2 trucks. She was on her feet. "What do we do?" "We don't fight from here. The cabin has 1 exit road, and the snow's been coming down for 6 hours. They'll have tracked the tire marks straight to the door." He was already moving back to the main room, going to the storage closet where he'd put the bag he hadn't fully unpacked. "We go out the back on foot, cross the ridge, get to the old service road on the north side. I have the truck keys. If we move now, we can get to it before they bottle up the front." "Through the snow, in the dark." "Yes." She didn't argue. She pulled on her jacket and boots without another word. Logan unzipped the bottom compartment of the bag, the one he'd never mentioned to her because there hadn't been a reason to yet. Inside was a compact 9mm he'd kept in the lockbox at the storage unit and transferred quietly when they'd packed to leave the city. 2 spare magazines, a small tactical flashlight, a folding knife. He checked the weapon by feel, confirmed the chamber, and holstered it at his waist. Victoria watched him do this without comment. Then she picked up her own jacket from the hook by the door, checked the interior pocket for the physical drive, still there, and put Ernest the rabbit in the outer pocket because there was no rational reason to, and she did it anyway. "Ready," she said. "Back door. Stay close. Step where I step." They went out into the dark. The cold hit immediately. Not the moderate chill of the cabin, but the real cold of a mountain night in a snowstorm, the kind that climbs inside your collar and presses against your skin with intention. The snow was 8 or 9 inches deep in the clearing and deeper at the tree line where it had drifted against the trunks. Logan moved fast, cutting a line toward the tree break to the north, keeping his body angled so the flashlight beam stayed low and close to the ground. Behind them, maybe 3 minutes after they cleared the back of the cabin, he heard the sound of engines on the access road. "Don't look back," he said quietly. "I'm not looking back." They moved through the trees for 20 minutes, hard going, the snow uneven underfoot, branches at face level in the dark, the wind cutting sideways through the gaps in the canopy. Victoria kept pace without complaint. She stumbled twice and caught herself both times before he could reach for her, which he noted. She wasn't hiking trail experienced, but she was determined in a way that compensated for a lot. The ridge was longer than Logan had remembered. Memory had smoothed it out, made it more manageable than the reality of scrambling up a 40-degree incline through fresh snow in the dark. By the time they crested it, he was breathing hard, and she was breathing harder. They stopped for 30 seconds. Below them, through the trees on the south side, he could see lights moving around the cabin, flashlight beams, maybe 4 or 5 distinct sources. "How did they find us?" she asked between breaths. "The truck," he said. Nadia's contact was reliable but not invisible. Someone with resources ran the plates backward. He was already scanning the north slope. Or Dan's federal contacts have a leak. Either way, it doesn't matter right now. It matters later. Yes, later. They went down the north side, which was longer but more gradual, following the natural drainage line that Logan had walked once 7 years ago and remembered with enough accuracy to be useful. The service road materialized out of the dark at the bottom. Just tire ruts and gravel mostly buried under snow, but a road. The truck was where he'd left it, tucked under a corrugated metal overhang attached to an old equipment shed that he'd used as secondary parking. Somebody from the previous military use of the property had built the shed for reasons Logan had never known and never asked, and he'd been grateful for the shelter every time it rained or snowed when he was up here. Tonight he was more grateful than usual. He got the door open, got Victoria in, got himself in, and the engine running in under a minute. No headlights yet. He pulled out onto the service road by feel and the thin ambient light of the snow, until he was far enough from the shed that the engine noise wouldn't carry back clearly. "They'll hear us eventually," Victoria said. "By the time they loop around, we'll be on the county road." He kept the speed controlled. Too fast on fresh snow in the dark was its own problem. "There's a town about 40 minutes north, small, has a motel and a diner and a gas station. I've been through it twice. Nobody there knows anything about either of us." She exhaled slowly and leaned her head back against the headrest. "Logan, what's the plan now? The real plan. Not the immediate plan. The actual plan." He drove for a moment before answering. "We can't keep running. They'll keep finding us because they have more resources, and we're leaving traces every time we move." He kept his eyes on the dark road. "We have to go at Damien directly. We surface on our terms, in a place we control, and we make him come to us instead of the other way around." "How do we make him come to us?" "We let him think he's winning." He glanced at her. "If Damien believes he can still contain this, eliminate the witnesses, bury the evidence, he won't run. He'll engage. Disappearing is a last resort for someone who's spent decades building an empire. He wants to preserve it if he can. We give him a scenario where he thinks he can. You want to bait him?" "Yes." She thought about it. "With what?" "With the suggestion that we're ready to negotiate, that we're frightened and we want a way out." He watched the tree line on either side of the road. People like Damien can't resist a situation where they think the leverage is back in their hands. It's not arrogance exactly, it's certainty. They've operated from a position of control for so long that they stop being able to imagine the alternative. So we tell him we want a deal. Through a channel he'll find credible. Not directly, that's too obvious. Through someone he thinks he's already managed. Logan turned the heat up. Victoria's hands were red from the cold, and she was tucking them under her arms. There's a lawyer. Name is Gerald Fitch. He's been Blackwood Global's external legal counsel for 11 years. He's also been invoiced by 3 separate entities that connect back to Damien's offshore structure. He doesn't know, we know that. You pulled Fitch's background. Night before last, while you were sleeping. He's compromised enough that Damien trusts him completely, but he's not a true believer. He's a man who got paid too well for too long to ask the right questions. That's different. Someone like that, when they see which way the wind is blowing, they become useful very quickly. She was quiet for a moment. And where do we have this meeting? I have a place. It's been mine for 4 years, and it's not in any record connected to my service history. I set it up after Claire died, when I was still thinking about going into private security and needed an operational base. He paused. I never used it for that because I never went into private security. But I kept it equipped because letting go of it felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. What did it feel like it was admitting? He considered this honestly. That I was really done. That the life I'd trained for was completely behind me, and I was just going to be someone's father and someone's maintenance worker for the rest of my life. He said it without self-pity, just the plain truth of it. I'm not ashamed of either of those things, but that place represented a version of me I hadn't completely buried yet. And now? And now I'm on a mountain road at 4 in the morning, running from mercenaries with a CEO who fights like someone who's never been taught to be afraid of things. So I think the version of me I hadn't buried has found a reason to get back up. Victoria looked at him. The dashboard lights caught the edge of her face. She didn't say anything for a moment, and when she did, her voice was quieter than usual. I don't fight like someone who's never been afraid. No, he said. You fight like someone who is afraid and does it anyway. That's the better version. She turned back to the road ahead and didn't answer, but something in the set of her shoulders changed. The warehouse was on the edge of an industrial zone south of the city, the kind of district that had been built for one economic era and left behind by the next, populated now by small fabrication businesses, storage operations, and a handful of legitimate commercial tenants who liked the low rent and didn't ask about the neighbors. Logan had leased the space under a holding name through a property management company, paying quarterly in cash by money order for 4 years. The management company was the incurious kind. It was, from the outside, completely unremarkable. Corrugated steel walls, roll-up loading doors, a regular access door on the south face with a keypad lock. Inside was a different matter. Logan had spent the first year after Claire's death building it out in the evenings after Sophie went to sleep. Not obsessively, not in a way that worried anyone, just methodically, the way he'd always worked when he had a problem he needed to work with his hands. Wiring ran to 6 separate camera positions covering every approach angle. A modified network switch sent the feeds to both local storage and an automatic cloud backup that uploaded on a 20-minute cycle without requiring manual activation. A secondary power system kicked in from a battery bank if the main line went down. 2 interior partition walls created a layered space, a front area that looked like a storage room, a middle section with workbenches and equipment, and a back room that was the actual operational core. He told himself he was building a security consulting base. He'd mostly been building something to do with the part of his brain that didn't know how to be still. They arrived at 6 in the morning. He got Victoria inside, showed her where everything was, set the cameras running. Then he called Dan Kowalski. Dan picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake. The mountain place is blown, Logan said. I know. I'm sorry. I don't know yet whether the leak is on my end or the truck trace, and I'm running it down. Dan's voice was tight. You both okay? We're okay. We're at the secondary location. Dan, I need to move the timeline up. I want to bring Damien to us within 48 hours. A pause. That's aggressive. It's necessary. Every day we wait is another day he has to consolidate and run. The longer this goes, the higher the chance he cuts losses and disappears somewhere we can't follow. What do you need from me? Gerald Fitch, your federal contact, do they have anything on him? Enough to have a conversation. I need Fitch contacted today. Not by the feds directly. Something that plants the idea that we're scared and willing to talk terms. He'll carry that to Damien. Damien will want to meet, because meeting means he thinks he can end it. And when he comes to meet, everything goes live. We've got his confession on audio from Raymond's drive, the video of him with Edward, the financial records, the hit team authorization trail. When he walks in here thinking he's closing a deal, all of it goes out simultaneously. Logan looked at the camera positions. I set up a streaming system in here 2 years ago, broadband feed to a cloud relay. I can have it live to 6 different platforms in under 3 minutes. Silence on the other end. Then, Logan, if Damien comes to a meeting like that, he's not coming alone. No, he'll bring people. How many can you handle? Logan looked at Victoria, who was standing across the room listening to his side of the call, with her arms folded and her face entirely composed. I thought about the parking garage, about the ridge and the snow, about the way she'd caught herself on the mountain slope without asking for help. Enough, he said. He ended the call. Victoria was watching him. You knew I was going to be part of this, she said. You didn't ask if I wanted to be. Do you want to be? Yes. No hesitation. But you should have asked. You're right, I should have. He held her gaze. Do you want to be part of this? Yes, she said again. What do you need me to do? The next 36 hours were a kind of compressed, purposeful existence that Logan recognized from his operational years. The particular intensity of preparation before something that couldn't be undone, where every decision carried weight and the work itself became a way of not thinking too hard about what came next. He walked Victoria through the warehouse's systems thoroughly. The camera feeds, the streaming setup, the secondary power. She learned quickly and asked precise questions and didn't pretend to understand things she didn't, which made the whole process faster. She rewired the streaming relay with him, following his instructions, handing tools without being asked after the first 10 minutes because she'd figured out the pattern of what he needed. They ate from the warehouse's supply cache, canned food, protein bars, instant coffee that tasted like dissolved cardboard, and that they both drank without complaint. They slept in shifts, 3 hours each, which wasn't enough, but was more than nothing. On the second morning, Dan called back. Fitch bit, he said. My contact had a conversation with him last night. Laid out enough of what we have on his involvement to make him very attentive. He's scared. Scared people are useful. Did he contact Damien? He did. This morning. Damien responded within 2 hours, which tells you everything about how much he wants this closed. A pause. Damien wants a face-to-face. He wants Victoria present. He says he has a proposal, and he won't negotiate through intermediaries. Logan looked at Victoria. She was sitting across the room with the laptop open, had been reviewing the evidence files again for the 3rd time, with the particular focus of someone building a mental architecture they intended to use. I wants to see her, Logan said. He wants to verify she's contained, Dan said. In his mind, this is him coming to collect loose ends. He'll bring people. I know. What's the number? Fitch said he mentioned a security team. My read is 4 to 6. Damien won't come personally undermanned. He's too careful for that. But he also can't bring an army to a private negotiation without it being obvious. 4 to 6, Logan repeated. He was calculating angles, positions, lines of sight through the warehouse space. Okay, set the meeting for tonight, 8 p.m. Send Fitch the address. Logan, I know what I'm doing. I know you think you know what you're doing. That's what I'm worried about. Dan, do you trust me? A long pause. Yeah, God help me, I do. Then set the meeting. He paused. And have your federal contacts positioned outside by 7:30. I don't want them inside, Bo. They'll spook Damien before he opens his mouth. But I want them close enough to come in fast when it's time. I'll handle it. He ended the call. Victoria had closed the laptop and was looking at him. Tonight, she said. Tonight. She nodded slowly. I want to be in the room when he comes in the front area where he can see me. That's the plan. You're the reason he comes through the door. Logan sat down across from her. I need you to understand something. When he walks in, he's going to be in control mode. He's going to try to establish dominance immediately, the way he does in board meetings, the way he's done his whole career. He'll be polite, probably, calm. He might even be kind. I know how he operates. I know you know. I'm telling you anyway because it's going to feel different when he's standing in front of you. He looked at her steadily. You cannot let him see what you know. Not until everything is streaming and the confession is running. The moment he thinks the situation is out of his control, he becomes unpredictable. How long do I need to hold it? Long enough for him to start talking. People like Damien, given a chance to explain themselves to someone they think they've beaten. They talk. They can't help it. It's the same impulse that built the empire. They want credit. He paused. You just have to give him enough space to take it. She was quiet for a moment. And if I can't hold it? You'll hold it. You don't know that. No, he admitted. But I've watched you hold things for 3 days that most people couldn't carry for 3 hours. I'm making an educated assessment. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face. Not quite gratitude, not quite something else. Something that didn't have a clean name. Okay, she said. Okay. He stood up. Get some rest. I have work to do. What? At 7:45, the cameras showed Dan's federal vehicles taking up positions in the industrial lot adjacent to the warehouse. Unmarked, but Logan could read the posture of the people in them from 100 yards away through a camera lens. At 8:02, 3 vehicles turned onto the access road. 2 black SUVs and a dark sedan. They parked in a line facing the warehouse door, which was also a dominant signal, blocking the exit, establishing a perimeter on arrival. Logan had expected it. He was in the middle section of the warehouse, behind the first partition wall, invisible from the front area. He had the 9mm, 2 full magazines, and a clear line of sight through a gap in the partition to the front door and the space around it. Victoria was in the front area, standing near a folding table, illuminated by the work lights. She looked like exactly what Damien expected to see. Someone who had been running for 3 days and was out of options. Logan had the streaming interface open on the tablet propped against the partition wall. Camera feeds from all 6 positions. The relay was live, connected, ready. 1 button to push. He watched the front door open. Damien Graves came in first, alone, which was a confident statement. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, dressed in a dark coat that probably cost more than Logan's car. He looked exactly the way Logan had seen him look in building corridors and lobby footage. Composed, measured, wearing his authority so naturally that it had probably stopped feeling like something he wore and started feeling like something he simply was. 2 of his men positioned themselves inside the door. The others, Logan assumed, stayed with the vehicles. Damien looked at Victoria. His expression was something Logan could only describe as professionally warm. The look of a man who was very good at simulating something he didn't actually feel. Victoria, he said. I'm relieved you're all right. Are you? She said. He walked closer, slowly. You've been through an ordeal. I understand why you ran. Given what happened in the garage, the fear you must have felt. He shook his head. I want you to know that I've been working since that night to identify who was behind it. We've made progress. Have you? Logan could hear the effort it was costing her to keep her voice level. He pushed the streaming button. Damien tilted his head slightly. Victoria, I know this has been terrifying, but the damage to the company from this situation, the longer you're absent, the more unstable things become. Your board is concerned. The institutional investors are watching. He spread his hand slightly. I came here personally because I wanted to offer you a path through this, a way to resolve it quietly. Quietly, she said. The people who came after you that night were not connected to Blackwood Global. They were external actors targeting the company's leadership. It's a story that can be managed. Damien, her voice changed, just enough. The brake line's on my mother's car. He went very still. It was a small stillness, just a fraction of a second, but Logan caught it from 20 feet away through a gap in a partition wall. I'm sorry, Damien said. The servicing company, the one that maintained our family vehicles in 2004, it billed through a Blackwood Global Operations account. It was under your authority. She held his gaze. I have the PI report. I have the supplemental audit data. I have the message threads between you and your logistics contact. I have your voice, Damien, on a recording, calling me an asset that needed to be resolved. Damien's face didn't collapse. She'd said it right. He was good. But the warmth evaporated. What was left was something much older and much colder. You don't have anything that will hold up, he said. I have 43 files, 3 audio recordings, a video of you delivering something to my father's desk and calling it medicine, a ghost employee assignment order that cleared Raymond from the garage, and a financial trail that runs through Cyprus and the Caymans straight to your brother-in-law's company. She took one step toward him. And everyone watching this conversation right now has all of it too. That landed. He glanced around the space, saw nothing he could immediately identify. Logan watched his eyes track to the ceiling corners, saw the precise moment Damien registered the camera housing at the northeast position. You're streaming, he said. Have been for about 4 minutes, Victoria said. It went to 6 platforms simultaneously. There's no version of tonight where you contain it. Damien looked at his 2 men by the door. Logan tracked them both. Neither had drawn yet. They were waiting for a signal from Damien, which meant they were hired professionals rather than personally loyal soldiers, which was useful. The recording, Damien said very quietly. Regarding the asset. The word you used. That was a business discussion taken out of context. The video of you handing my father a substance that his physician will now confirm was causing his cognitive deterioration is harder to take out of context, Victoria said. The court will work out the context. Something shifted in Damien's posture, just slightly. The calculation behind his eyes was still running. Logan could see it, the same way you could see a machine still processing after the power had been cut. Momentum carrying it forward even though the energy source was gone. I was looking for the angle that didn't exist anymore. The man with you, Damien said. The maintenance worker. Yes. He put you up to this. He built this scenario. His voice had found a new register. Not warmth, not cold, something almost reasonable. Victoria, you've been in a stressful situation with someone who has his own agenda, someone whose background you don't fully... His background is the reason I'm standing here instead of lying in a parking garage, she said. So I'm going to take that one as a point in his favor. Logan was watching the 2 men at the door. The one on the left had shifted his weight forward. His right hand had moved from the door frame toward his hip. Don't, Logan said, loud enough to carry, stepping out from behind the partition with the 9mm level and unhurried. Both men froze. He kept the weapon on the one who'd been moving. Hands visible, both of you. They looked at Damien. Damien looked at Logan. And in that look was the first completely honest expression Logan had seen from him. Not the cold, not the warmth, not the professional composure. Just the look of a man whose machinery had finally run out of momentum. It's over, Logan said. Damien didn't answer. From outside, Logan heard the federal vehicles moving, the sound of car doors and boots on gravel, the specific purposeful sound of people who had been waiting and had just been given the word to stop waiting. The 2 men at the door put their hands up. Damien stood completely still in the middle of the floor. His coat was perfectly pressed. His hair was perfectly silver. He looked like a man at a board meeting who had just realized the vote was not going to go the way he'd expected and was deciding how to manage his exit from the room. There was no exit from this room. Victoria walked to the folding table and picked up the tablet with the streaming interface. The view counter in the corner of the screen had been climbing steadily for 6 minutes. It was at 47,000 when she looked at it. While she watched, it crossed 50. She turned the screen so Damien could see it. He looked at it for a long moment. His jaw tightened slightly, the first physical crack in the surface that had been immaculate all evening. My father built that company, Victoria said. 30 years. 23 employees and a leased office in Columbus. He built it for something real. Her voice was completely steady now, not because the emotion was gone, but because it had found its proper place and was no longer fighting to get out. You've been standing in what he built and calling it yours for 20 years. You killed my mother to get access to it. You poisoned my father to keep it, and you sent people to kill me to protect it. Damien said nothing. I want you to know that I watched the number on that screen tonight. That's how many people know exactly what you are. She set the tablet down. That's your legacy. The federal agents came through the door hard and fast. 6 of them, 2 splitting immediately to either side, 2 going for Damien's security, 2 going directly for Damien himself. Logan kept his weapon on the left side man until he saw the agent's hand on that man's shoulder, and then he lowered it and stepped back. The room was loud for about 90 seconds. Then it was quiet. Damien was in handcuffs. He hadn't resisted. He stood with his hands behind his back and looked at the middle distance and said nothing. Not to the agents reading him his rights, not to the men on either side of him. He had retreated into some internal space where the machinery was still processing, even though the entire structure around it had come down. Victoria stood near the partition wall. Her arms were loose at her sides. Logan moved to stand near her. Not next to her, just near, close enough that she'd know he was there. She was looking at Damien being walked toward the door. "Is it supposed to feel different?" she said quietly. "Not to anyone exactly, maybe to herself." "Yeah," Logan said. "It usually does." He watched the agents move through the door. "It settles later. Tonight it just feels like the end of a long night." She looked at him. "Sophie's going to be confused." "Sophie's confused by a lot of things. She manages." Victoria almost smiled, made it most of the way there. "I want to call my father." "He's going to need you." "I know." She looked at the door where Damien had gone. "He's going to feel like a fool. He's going to feel humiliated and betrayed, and like his entire memory of the last 20 years has been contaminated." "Yes." "He's going to need someone to tell him it wasn't his fault, that trusting someone who made themselves trustworthy isn't stupidity, it's just being human." She looked at Logan. "How do I tell him that without it sounding like something you say to make someone feel better?" "You say it because it's true," Logan said. "And you say it more than once, and eventually he'll start to believe it." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the night had gone still. The federal activity settling, engines running, the sounds of people doing the procedural work that follows the thing itself. She reached into her outer jacket pocket and took out the small stuffed rabbit. She looked at it for a second, then held it out to Logan. "For Sophie," she said. "With my thanks." He took it. "She'll want it back in person." "I was counting on that," Victoria said. The view counter on the abandoned tablet across the room kept climbing quietly in the empty space, the number turning over and over, carrying the truth outward into the night, in all directions at once. Unstoppable now, the way truth tends to be once it finally finds a way through. The view counter had passed 2 million by morning. Logan found out from Dan Kowalski, who called it 6:47 while Logan was sitting in the federal field office waiting room on a plastic chair with bad back support, drinking coffee from a paper cup that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. He hadn't slept. There hadn't been time, and even if there had been, his body wouldn't have cooperated. It was still running on the particular chemical cocktail that combat situations leave behind, the one that takes a full day to drain out of your system no matter how much you want it gone. 2 million views across platforms, Dan said, and climbing. 3 major news networks picked up the stream footage within an hour of the warehouse. By midnight, it was the top story on every national outlet. A pause. Damien Graves is finished, not just legally. The court of public opinion has already rendered its verdict, and it wasn't close. "Good," Logan said. "How are you doing?" Logan looked at the waiting room. Institutional carpet, fluorescent light, a potted plant in the corner that might have been artificial. Sitting in a government building drinking bad coffee. So normal post-operation protocol. Something like that. He shifted in the chair. "Victoria?" "She's been in with the federal prosecutors since 11 last night. They're not done." Dan's voice carried the particular tone of someone who had been around federal processes long enough to understand their rhythms. "They're going to want everything, Logan. Every decision point, every safe house, the mountain cabin, all of it. Be thorough and be patient. I know how this works. I know you do. I'm saying it anyway because last time you were in a federal interview, you told the debriefer that his line of questioning was inefficient and suggested a restructured approach. It was inefficient. Logan, I'll be patient." He finished the cold coffee. "Dan, the leak, did you find it?" A longer pause. "The truck trace. Nadia's contact used a registration service that had been compromised 6 months ago by a private intelligence contractor working for one of Damien's offshore entities. It wasn't your operational security. It wasn't anyone on our end." Logan absorbed that. He'd known it was one or the other, and he'd run both possibilities through his head enough times during the night that neither answer came as a complete surprise. But the confirmation settled something. "Okay," he said, "get some sleep when they're done with you." "Yeah." He sat in that waiting room for another 2 hours before a prosecutor's assistant came to get him. The interview took 4 hours and was thorough in the way that federal processes are when they're building something intended to last. Every detail confirmed, every timeline established, every piece of evidence accounted for and sourced. Logan answered everything directly and didn't editorialize except once, when an agent suggested that his decision to handle the initial extraction from the parking garage without contacting law enforcement had been a complicating factor. And Logan pointed out, without raising his voice, that law enforcement's response time to a silent sniper situation in an underground garage would have put Victoria Hale in the ground before the first patrol car arrived. The agent moved on. He came out of the interview at 2 in the afternoon into a hallway where Victoria was sitting on a bench outside a different door, waiting. She looked like he felt hollowed out in a functional way, the kind of exhaustion that has moved past discomfort into something that is simply the condition you exist in until it isn't anymore. She looked up when she heard him. "Done?" she said. "Done." She stood. She'd lost the jacket somewhere. She was in just her work blouse, which had been through 3 days in a mountain snowstorm and looked exactly like that. Her hair was back in the rubber band. She had the physical drive in her hand, which the prosecutors had copied and returned with a receipt. "They have everything," she said. "So do 6 different server backups and Nadia's holding copies and Dan's federal contacts." He stopped in front of her. "It's not going anywhere." "No." She looked at the drive for a moment, then put it in her pocket. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but in that direction. "I'll be dealing with the circumstances for a while myself." The circumstances, as it turned out, were enormous and complicated and would take months to fully unspool. Logan learned most of this in pieces over the weeks that followed, from news coverage and occasional updates from Dan rather than from direct involvement. Because his direct involvement was over, and that was the correct and necessary thing, even if the transition from operational intensity back to ordinary life had a particular kind of vertigo to it that he recognized from leaving the SEALs and hadn't entirely missed. Damian Graves was formally charged on 26 counts spanning financial fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and a separate charge related to the poisoning of Edward Hale. Gerald Fitch, the lawyer, cooperated fully with prosecutors within 48 hours of the warehouse, trading his testimony for a reduced charge and a sentencing agreement that would still cost him his license and 5 years of his life. The maritime logistics coordinator, whose photograph Raymond had captured at that restaurant lunch, was picked up at O'Hare attempting to board a flight to Lisbon. He cooperated less readily than Fitch, but cooperated eventually, which they usually do. The 8 corporate executives who had known about or participated in various aspects of Damian's financial architecture, not all of them aware of the full picture, some of them willfully ignorant in the specific way that protects a person legally but doesn't fully protect them morally, were charged on a sliding scale of involvement. 3 of them took plea deals. 2 went to trial and lost. 3 more were still working through the process when Logan stopped following the news coverage closely, because following it too closely was its own kind of not letting go. And he'd learned enough about not letting go to recognize the pattern. Damian himself went to trial 8 months later. He maintained his composure throughout, which surprised exactly no one who had watched him operate. He was convicted on 19 of the 26 counts. The judge, in sentencing, described the crimes as representing a sustained and deliberate exploitation of trust that had caused measurable harm to real people over 2 decades and sentenced him accordingly. Multiple life sentences, effectively. He would die in a federal facility. Logan heard about the sentencing from Dan and sat with it for a few minutes, and then took Sophie to her soccer practice, because Sophie's soccer practice was at 4 o'clock on Tuesdays, regardless of what the federal justice system was doing, and that was as it should be. Victoria resigned as CEO of Blackwood Global 3 weeks after the warehouse. She did it in a letter to the board that was formal and brief and contained no self-pity and no drama. She cited the need for institutional restructuring under leadership that hadn't been embedded in the circumstances of the previous era, which was accurate and also somewhat understated. The board spent 2 days trying to talk her out of it, which she'd apparently anticipated and had no interest in. She also relinquished a substantial portion of her financial interest in the company as part of the investigative cooperation process, voluntarily, beyond what was legally required, because she'd decided that keeping it felt wrong, and she'd learned, somewhat recently, to trust that instinct. Edward Hale's recovery was slow and not linear. There were good weeks and hard weeks. He was a man in his mid-70s who had spent the last several years believing his mind was failing him, and who had now learned that the failure had been engineered by someone he loved like a brother. That knowledge didn't heal cleanly. It had jagged edges that caught on things unexpectedly. Victoria told Logan about it over the phone one evening, about 6 weeks after the warehouse, when she called to ask how Sophie was doing and ended up talking for an hour about her father. "He keeps apologizing to me," she said, "for not seeing it, for trusting Damien. He thinks he let the company down. He thinks he let me down. He thinks—" She stopped. "I keep telling him that's not what happened, that Damien was a professional at exactly this for a very long time, and that the fact that nobody saw through him is actually evidence of how sophisticated the deception was, not evidence of failure. Does he hear it? Some days he does. Some days he just stares at the window." A pause. "He asked me about you." "About me?" "He wanted to know who you were. I told him you were someone from the building who happened to know what he was doing and had the skills to do something about it." She was quiet for a moment. "He said he'd like to thank you someday." Logan was sitting at the kitchen table. Sophie was asleep down the hall. The apartment was quiet and warm and familiar in all the ways that mattered. "Tell him it's not necessary. He'll want to do it anyway. He's from a generation that does things like that in person. Then I'll be easy to find." He paused. "How are you?" "Getting there." She said it in the way she said most things, straightforwardly, without decoration. "I'm not the CEO of anything right now, which feels stranger than I expected. I've been that or working toward that for so long that not having the structure is—" She searched for the word. "Disorienting. Like losing a language you've been speaking for years and having to relearn how to communicate without it." "What are you going to do?" "I've been thinking about that." Another pause, longer. "There are a lot of people who go through versions of what my father went through, what I went through. Corporate abuse, institutional fraud, the kind of harm that happens inside organizations that are supposed to be trustworthy. Most of them don't have a Raymond Webb quietly building a case on their behalf. Most of them don't have someone who walks into a parking garage at the right moment." She paused. "I want to build something that helps those people. Legal resources, advocacy, support through the process. Not a law firm. Something more than that. More personal." "That's a good use of what you know," Logan said. "You sound surprised." "I'm not surprised. It fits you. The version of you I've seen in the last week anyway. The one that's not running a $17 billion company." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that a compliment?" "I think so." "I'll take it." He heard something that might have been a small laugh. "Logan, Sophie's birthday is in March, right? You mentioned it at the cabin." "March 14th. I'd like to bring her something, if that's all right." He looked at the hallway where Sophie's bedroom door was cracked open, the nightlight making a thin yellow stripe across the floor. "She'd like that." "Good." A brief pause. "And I'd like to see you." He didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because there were things that mattered about saying it right, and he wanted to make sure he was doing that rather than just saying something easy. "I'd like that too," he said. "Okay," she said. March. March came the way it always does in the Midwest. Reluctantly and imperfectly, a few warm days followed by cold, snapping back like it had unfinished business. The snow mostly gone, but the ground still hard and gray-brown. The first green things pushing up anyway because the calendar insisted on it whether the weather agreed or not. Sophie turned 8. Logan made her pancakes in the shape of animals, which he'd been doing every birthday since she was 4, and which he was objectively not very good at. The rabbit always looked more like a dog, and the elephant was basically a gray blob with ear-like protrusions. And she ate them with the particular enthusiasm of a child who understands that the effort matters more than the execution. Which was, Logan had always thought, one of the better things about children. They understood that without being taught. Victoria arrived at 11 in the morning with a gift bag that Sophie approached with the focused assessment of a person who takes presents seriously. Inside was a book, a thick illustrated guide to botanical Latin names, the kind you'd find in a university library, with detailed drawings and taxonomy going back 2 centuries. Sophie held it in both hands and looked at it with a slight frown that meant she was deciding whether to be interested. "It's about plants," Victoria said. "They're real names. Not just what people call them, but what they actually are." "Why do they have 2 names?" "So no matter where you are in the world, if you know the real name, someone else will know exactly what you're talking about. It travels. Victoria crouched to Sophie's level. Your dad said you're good at remembering things. I am, Sophie confirmed, without false modesty. Then you'll be good at this. Sophie looked at the book again, then at Victoria. My teacher has plants in the classroom. She says they help us concentrate. That's true? Do you know what kind they are? Regular ones. Victoria almost laughed. We can find out their real names if you want. Okay, Sophie said, already opening to the first page. The matter settled. Logan watched this from the kitchen doorway with a cup of coffee. He wasn't trying to analyze it or give it more weight than it needed. He was just watching it, the way you watch something simple that is actually not simple at all, and letting it be what it was. They went to the park in the afternoon because Sophie had declared that flying a kite was what she wanted to do for her birthday, a request that Logan had honored by buying a kite at the pharmacy the day before, the cheap kind with the plastic frame and the long fabric tail, the kind of kite that generations of children have flown successfully despite their structural limitations. It was the right kind of wind for it, not too strong, just steady and cooperative. Sophie ran with the kite string for about 40 feet before it caught and pulled upward, and then she stood with her face tipped back and the string in both hands, the kite going higher in stuttering increments, her expression one of absolute satisfaction. Logan and Victoria stood nearby. The park was half occupied, but a few other families, a man walking a dog that was large and enthusiastic and thoroughly ignoring its owner's instructions, some older people on a bench near the path. Ordinary Saturday afternoon in a place that had no idea any of them had been anywhere else recently or done anything in particular. She's good at that, Victoria said. She practices on her own, goes to the park with Mrs. Grabowski sometimes. He watched Sophie adjust the string angle with surprising instinct. Claire used to say Sophie had her father's stubbornness and her mother's patience, which is the correct combination for most practical problems. She was right. She usually was. A comfortable quiet settled between them, the kind that had become familiar without either of them making a decision about it. The same quality of quiet they'd found in the cabin kitchen, in the storage unit, in Nadia's living room. The quiet of two people who had been through something together and didn't need to perform ease because ease had arrived on its own. How's the nonprofit coming? Logan asked. Slowly, which is normal for building something from the ground up. She watched Sophie. I keep wanting to move faster than the process allows. I have to remind myself that doing it right takes longer than doing it. You'll get there. I know. No, it's just, I keep thinking about the people who need it right now today. The waiting feels like a luxury they don't have. She paused. Carol Wren is consulting on the legal framework. She's good at it, and she feels responsible, even though she shouldn't. She flagged the audit concerns as far as she could. Carol's involvement will make it better. Yes. Victoria turned slightly. Raymond starts physical therapy next month. They say full recovery is likely. Good. He asked about you. I wanted to know if you'd found the drive where he left it. Logan thought about the utility room on level 2. The plumbing access cavity. A man who'd been hit hard enough to lose consciousness and had still thought clearly enough to put the thing where it needed to be. Tell him it was exactly where it needed to be. I will. She paused. He also said that in 9 years of security work, he'd never seen anyone move through a building like you did that night. He said it from a hospital bed and he still sounded annoyed about it. Tell him it's not a competition. He'll also be annoyed by that. Logan almost smiled. Sophie had gotten the kite to what was, by reasonable estimation, its maximum altitude, and had apparently decided this called for announcement. She turned and yelled across the grass that it was really high, which was both accurate and sufficient. It is really high, Victoria called back. Sophie turned back to the kite, satisfied. The wind shifted slightly. The kite dipped, recovered, steadied. Sophie made the micro-adjustments without thinking about them, the way you do when you've been holding something long enough that the communication between your hands and the thing becomes instinctive. Logan thought about a thing he'd been thinking about on and off since the warehouse. Not in a way that troubled him, but in the way that things settle into understanding slowly if you let them, instead of forcing them into shape before they're ready. He'd spent 4 years telling himself that the quiet life, the maintenance work, the school pickups, the apartment with the low ceilings, and the good neighborhood was what he'd chosen, freely and finally. And it was. He didn't want to unsay that. But there was a difference between choosing a life because it's right and choosing it because you've stopped believing anything else is available to you. He'd been doing both, and he hadn't fully separated them until recently. The cabin north of the city had been a physical storage unit for a version of himself he hadn't been ready to release. The warehouse had been built by a man who still believed, somewhere underneath everything, that he had more to offer than a mop handle and a bent aluminum collar. Neither of those things negated Sophie's pancakes or the nightlight stripe under her bedroom door. They just meant the picture was larger than he'd been drawing it. He didn't say any of this to Victoria. He wasn't sure yet how much of it was finished enough to say, but he thought about it standing in the park on a March afternoon with the kite string and the ordinary noise of the world around them, and it felt less like a conclusion and more like a door that had been there the whole time with the light coming through the gap at the bottom. "Logan," Victoria said. "Yeah." She was looking at the kite, not at him. "I'm not good at this part." "What part?" "The part where you say the thing you've been meaning to say and you're not sure it lands the way you intend it." She paused. "I'm good at board presentations and legal strategy and running something large. This kind of thing She exhaled. "Less practiced." "Say it anyway." She looked at him then, direct, the way she looked at everything. "I don't want March to be the only time I come here." He held her gaze. "Then don't make it the only time." "That simple?" "That's simple." He paused. "I'm not difficult to find. I'm currently between jobs, but I have a flexible schedule." She looked at him for a moment more, measuring him the way she measured most things. Not unkindly, but honestly, trying to see what was actually there rather than what she wanted to see. He let her look. He didn't adjust for it. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay," he said. Sophie, 20 yards away with a kite that had reached the end of its string, turned around and announced that someone needed to come hold it with her because her arms were getting tired, and she said it in the complete confidence that someone would. Victoria went first. She crossed the grass and took the string from Sophie with both hands, and immediately the kite dipped because she didn't have the angle right, and Sophie gave her a very patient, very serious explanation of the correct grip, while Logan watched from where he was standing. He thought about a parking garage and a bent mop handle and a 7-year-old girl asking if he was still on the adventure. He thought about a PI report and a 47-second video and a mountain road in the dark. He thought about the way trust gets built, not in dramatic moments, though those happen, but in the small continuous choices to show up and be honest and not look away when things are hard. He thought about what he would tell Sophie someday when she was old enough to want the full version of the story, not the adventure version, the real one. That the most important things he'd ever done hadn't required a weapon or a tactical position or a 6-man SEAL team. They'd required him to see a person clearly in a moment of danger and decide that doing nothing wasn't an option. That the difference between the man he'd been in uniform and the man he'd become wasn't a diminishment, it was a translation. The same values, the same willingness, applied to a smaller and more specific world. A world that was his. He walked across the grass. The kite had steadied under Sophie's instruction, and she was explaining something about the tail that required both her hands to demonstrate, which meant she'd let go of the string entirely, which Victoria was now managing alone with improved technique and considerable concentration. Logan took one side of the string, Victoria kept the other. The kite went up between them, the fabric tail streaming out behind it in a long, bright arc against the blue. Sophie looked up at it with the critical eye of the person responsible for its success, decided it was adequate, and then leaned against Logan's arm with the uncomplicated ease of a child who knows exactly where she belongs. "It's a good kite day," she announced. "Yeah," Logan said. "It's a good kite day." The wind held steady. The kite stayed up. And around them the park kept doing what parks do on March afternoons. The dog still ignoring its owner, the people on the bench turning their faces toward the pale warmth, the green things continuing their improbable push through the cold ground toward whatever came next. Not a perfect picture. Not a clean ending where all the hard things were solved and all the wounds had closed, and everyone had arrived at the life they deserved without residue or remainder. Edward Hale still had weeks ahead of him where grief would win the day and the window would be the only thing he could look at. Raymond Webb still had months of physical therapy. Victoria still had long evenings alone in an apartment trying to build something meaningful from the material of what she'd left behind. Logan still had nights when the quiet of the apartment was a different kind of quiet, And he'd think about Claire and the road trips and the talking, and it would cost him something. But here, today, in this particular moment, a kite in the March air and a child deciding her family was the right shape, and two people who had survived something terrible together, choosing to stand in the ordinary light of an ordinary afternoon and let that be enough. That was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the whole thing.